The crack of Nora Whitaker's slap echoed across the luxury penthouse, silencing the music for one frozen heartbeat. Her engagement ring struck the marble floor moments later, spinning in a lonely circle, as Arthur Collins stood speechless beside Lydia, Nora's younger sister. The two of them had been planning a wedding with Nora, while secretly building another relationship behind her back. No tears came, no desperate pleas, no dramatic scene. Nora simply looked at the two people she had sacrificed years of her life for, and realized they deserved nothing, not another explanation, not another chance, not another second of her future. She turned toward the exit. Then, everything changed. A deafening burst of automatic gunfire shattered the glass entrance downstairs. Guests screamed as armed men stormed into the building, forcing everyone to the floor. Before panic could consume the room, another group entered with astonishing discipline. Their movements were calm, precise, almost frighteningly efficient. At their center walked Victor Moretti, the man whose name was whispered with equal parts respect and fear throughout the city. Without raising his voice, he gave a single order. Within seconds, the attackers were disarmed. The chaos ended almost as quickly as it had begun. As terrified guests scrambled to hide behind overturned tables, Victor's sharp eyes settled on one unexpected sight. Instead of running, Nora was kneeling beside an injured waiter, using her scarf to stop the bleeding with remarkably steady hands. For the first time that night, Victor looked genuinely interested. He stepped toward her, glanced once at the growing danger outside, then spoke in the same calm voice that had just controlled an entire battlefield. "If you want to survive tonight, come with me." Nora had no idea that accepting one ride from the city's most feared mafia boss would destroy the life she knew, and give her a future she had never imagined. The city lights blurred beyond the tinted windows of the armored sedan as it sped away from the chaos. Nora sat silently in the back seat, her hands stained with someone else's blood. The waiter she had tried to save had survived long enough for Victor's medical team to take over, but the image of frightened eyes staring up at her refused to leave. Across from her, Victor Moretti remained perfectly composed. His tailored black suit bore no trace of the firefight that had erupted only minutes earlier. Even as one of his security chiefs quietly reported casualties through an encrypted earpiece, Victor listened with the detached focus of a man who had learned long ago that panic solved nothing. Only once did he glance toward Nora. "You weren't supposed to stay." His voice was calm, matter of fact. Most people would have mistaken it for criticism. Nora shook her head. "He would have died before anyone reached him." Victor studied her for another moment before looking away. "Most people save themselves first." "I've never been most people." The answer was simple. Honest, it lingered in the silence between them. For reasons even Victor couldn't explain, he remembered it. Less than 2 hours earlier, Nora had believed her biggest concern was choosing flowers for her wedding. Instead, she had opened Arthur's penthouse door, using the spare key he had insisted she keep. She wanted to surprise him with revised seating plans for their reception. The apartment had been unusually quiet. No music. No television, only laughter drifting from the bedroom. A familiar laugh. Lydia's. Nora had frozen. Every instinct urged her to believe there had to be another explanation. There wasn't. When she pushed open the bedroom door, Arthur and Lydia barely had time to separate. For one endless second, no one spoke. Arthur recovered first. "Nora, this isn't what it looks like." The oldest lie in history. Lydia wrapped a blanket around herself, lowering her eyes as if shame alone could erase betrayal. "I'm sorry." But even her apology sounded rehearsed. Nora didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask why. She removed her engagement ring, placed it carefully on the bedside table, then slapped Arthur hard enough to leave the outline of her fingers across his face. The wedding is over. 5 words. Delivered without emotion. Without hesitation, Arthur reached for her arm. "You're overreacting." Nora slowly looked down at his hand. For years, she had financed their shared apartment, while Arthur climbed the corporate ladder. She had postponed promotions because his career supposedly mattered more. She had ignored every holiday cancelled for business dinners, every forgotten anniversary, every promise delayed until after the wedding. And somehow, he still believed she was the one overreacting. She gently removed his hand. "No." Her voice remained astonishingly steady. "I'm finally reacting the right amount." Then she walked away. She never looked back. The bartender hesitated before placing another cup of coffee in front of her. "It's on the house." Nora managed a tired smile. "I don't even remember ordering one." "You looked like someone who shouldn't be alone tonight." Outside, rain had begun to fall. The tiny neighborhood bar offered temporary shelter from a life that no longer existed. She switched off her phone after ignoring nearly 30 missed calls. Arthur, Lydia, her mother, even her father. None of them asked if she was all right. Every voicemail carried the same message. "Come home. Let's talk. Don't make a scene. Think about your future." Not one person asked how it felt to discover the 2 people she trusted most had destroyed her wedding before it had even begun. The realization hurt more than the affair itself. She had always been expected to forgive, to understand, to sacrifice. Tonight, something inside her finally refused. The explosion outside rattled every glass behind the bar. People screamed. Gunfire followed immediately. The bartender ducked beneath the counter. Customers scrambled toward the kitchen. Someone shouted for the police. Nora instinctively turned toward the wounded security guard who had collapsed near the entrance instead of running toward safety herself. Without thinking, she grabbed clean bar towels and pressed them firmly against the bleeding wound. "Stay with me." The young guard struggled to breathe. "I don't want to die." "You're not going to." She kept steady pressure despite the blood soaking through her hands. Then the front doors opened. Silence spread almost unnaturally. Not because the danger had disappeared, because someone far more dangerous had arrived. Victor Moretti walked into the ruined bar, surrounded by disciplined bodyguards. No raised voices, no unnecessary movement. His people secured every exit with military precision. Victor's eyes scanned the room once. Bodies, broken furniture, spent shell casings. Then they settled on Nora. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't begging anyone to save her. She was trying to save someone else. Victor watched another few seconds before speaking. "Get them both to my medical team." One bodyguard hesitated. "Boss, she's a civilian," Victor answered without taking his eyes off Nora. "She is now under my protection." No one questioned him again. As Nora stood, exhausted and trembling for the first time that night, she realized she had just stepped into a world far more dangerous than the one she had left behind. She had escaped one betrayal. She had no idea she had just become connected to the most powerful man in the city. And somewhere beyond the rain-soaked streets, another pair of unseen eyes had already begun watching her. The following morning, Nora woke in a guest suite, larger than her entire apartment. For several seconds, she simply stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, convinced the previous night had been some impossible nightmare. Then she noticed the neatly folded clothes waiting outside the bedroom door. A fresh phone, a handwritten note. "Breakfast is ready when you are. No one will pressure you to speak. VM." She smiled despite herself. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't affection. But after years of living with people who demanded explanations for every emotion she showed, the simple courtesy of allowing her silence felt strangely comforting. Victor Moretti was already seated at the dining table when she entered. The room overlooked the harbor, where cargo ships bearing the Moretti name moved steadily through the morning mist. His attention remained on several financial reports until she sat down. "You slept?" "A little." He nodded once. "That's enough." Breakfast arrived without servants lingering nearby. No unnecessary conversation. No awkward sympathy. Victor understood that pity often wounded more deeply than honesty. Finally, he pushed a slim leather folder across the table. "My attorney will explain." A silver-haired man introduced himself. Alessandro Ricci. He opened the folder and slid several legal documents toward Nora. Mr. Moretti's grandfather established a succession agreement decades ago. At the time, he feared that wealth without family would eventually destroy everything he had built. Nora quietly listened. "One clause requires the head of the Moretti family to be legally married before assuming permanent control of several strategic holding companies." She frowned. "And if he isn't? The voting rights automatically transfer to distant relatives." "How much is involved?" Ricky answered without changing expression. "Approximately $4.6 billion in assets." Nora blinked. She had spent her career negotiating marketing budgets. The number sounded almost unreal. The deadline expires in 44 hours. Silence settled over the room. Victor finally spoke. "I don't have 44 hours to build trust with someone." His gray eyes met hers. "But I believe I already know enough about you." Nora looked genuinely confused. "You hardly know me. I know what you did when bullets were flying." Victor leaned back. "You helped a stranger. You walked away from a man who betrayed you instead of bargaining for dignity. You remained calm while everyone else panicked. I've built an empire by judging character under pressure." Another pause. "I rarely judge incorrectly." Those words carried more weight than any compliment she had ever received. Arthur had praised her appearance. Her family had praised her patience. Victor was the first person to recognize her decisions. "I have a proposal." His voice remained completely businesslike. "A legal marriage. No expectations beyond the contract. You'll have complete financial independence, personal security, 24 hours a day. You may continue your own career. When the inheritance issue is resolved, you're free to leave." Ricci added another document. "The agreement also guarantees a substantial settlement, regardless of how the marriage ends." Nora barely glanced at the amount. $5 million. A week ago, that number would have overwhelmed her. Today it meant surprisingly little. "What do you gain besides the inheritance?" Victor answered immediately. "A wife the public can believe." She looked at him. "And you think they'll believe me?" "They watched you leave a burning building with me. They'll believe." Nora let out a quiet breath. "You realize everyone will assume I'm marrying you for money. I've never cared what everyone thinks." His reply was so calm that she almost laughed. For the first time since discovering Arthur's betrayal, the tightness around her chest eased. Not because she trusted Victor, because he wasn't pretending to be someone else. Everything about him was transparent, dangerous, honest. Later that afternoon, Nora returned alone to the small apartment she had once shared with Arthur. Or rather, she intended to. 3 black SUVs stopped outside the building. 6 Moretti security officers stepped out first. Neighbors immediately began peeking through curtains. Word spread faster than anyone could imagine. Arthur opened the apartment door with dark circles beneath his eyes. "Nora!" His expression shifted from relief to confusion as he noticed the men behind her. "What is this?" "I'm collecting my belongings." "We need to talk." "No." His confidence faltered. "I made a mistake. You made hundreds. You simply got caught committing one." Arthur reached toward her again. She stepped aside before he could touch her. Inside the apartment, Lydia slowly emerged from the hallway, wearing one of Arthur's shirts. Her face drained of color when she recognized the insignia on the bodyguards' jackets. "Moretti," she whispered. Fear replaced arrogance almost instantly. Everyone in the city knew that name. No one wanted trouble with the Moretti syndicate. Lydia forced an uneasy smile. "Nora, I can explain." "There isn't anything left to explain." Nora calmly packed the last of her personal belongings. Family photographs, a few books, her laptop. Nothing else. Everything she truly valued had never belonged to the apartment. It belonged to the woman she had almost forgotten how to be. Arthur watched helplessly. Who are these people? Before Nora could answer, another car stopped outside. Victor himself stepped from the vehicle. He wore a charcoal suit, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Every conversation in the apartment complex ceased. Even Arthur instinctively straightened. Victor entered only after one of his security officers confirmed the area was secure. His gaze briefly swept across Arthur, then Lydia. Neither deserved more than a second of his attention. He stopped beside Nora. "Finished?" She nodded. Without another word, Victor reached for the overnight bag she carried. Not because it was heavy, because he carried burdens without making a show of it. The tiny gesture stunned everyone in the room. Arthur stared in disbelief. "You know each other?" Victor answered before Nora could. "My wife doesn't owe you an explanation." The words landed like thunder. Arthur's mouth fell open. Lydia's face turned completely pale. "Wife?" Victor calmly produced a certified marriage certificate. The ink was barely dry. Nora Whitaker, now legally. Nora Moretti. Arthur looked from the document to Nora, desperately searching for hesitation. Regret. Anything. Instead, he found only quiet certainty. She walked past him without slowing. As the convoy disappeared into downtown traffic, Arthur remained standing in the doorway, unable to comprehend how the woman he had believed would always wait for him had become untouchable in less than 24 hours. Neither he nor Lydia noticed the black sedan, parked half a block away. Inside, Salvatore Greco silently watched the Moretti convoy disappear. A slow smile crossed his face. "So," he murmured, "the great Victor Moretti finally has something to lose." Marriage to Victor Moretti changed Nora's address overnight. It did not change who she was. 3 days after the wedding, she sat quietly at the end of the conference table inside Moretti Group headquarters while executives debated declining public approval for the company's legitimate businesses. Shipping, commercial real estate, construction, private security, all highly profitable, all increasingly distrusted. One executive blamed the media. Another blamed politicians. A third insisted that nothing needed to change. Victor listened without interruption. When the meeting finally ended, everyone began gathering their files. Only then did Nora speak. "May I ask a question?" The room fell silent. Several senior advisors exchanged doubtful glances. One of them, a veteran executive named Charles Bennett, forced a polite smile. "Of course, Mrs. Moretti." The title sounded respectful. The tone did not. "If the public already believes we're hiding something," Nora asked calmly, "why are we spending millions trying to convince them we're perfect?" No one answered. She continued, "People don't trust perfection. They trust transparency." Another executive frowned. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Nora stood and walked toward the presentation screen. She hadn't prepared slides. She simply picked up a marker. Within minutes, she had sketched an entirely new communication strategy. Independent financial audits released publicly. Scholarship programs managed by outside organizations. Community rebuilding projects documented from beginning to end. Monthly press briefings with difficult questions answered instead of avoided. "Stop trying to look untouchable," she concluded. "Start becoming accountable." The room remained quiet. Not because they disagreed, because no one had considered such an approach before. Charles folded his arms. This isn't a charity. No, Nora replied evenly. It's a reputation. And reputation determines contracts, investors, government cooperation, employee loyalty. She looked around the room. Marketing isn't advertising. It's trust. Victor watched without saying a word. For the first time in years, he saw seasoned executives struggling to challenge someone's logic rather than dismissing it outright. Finally, he spoke. Implement her proposal. Charles blinked. Immediately? Victor closed his folder. I didn't stutter. The next several weeks became the busiest of Nora's career. She redesigned outdated corporate websites, personally interviewed employees whose stories reflected genuine community impact, created emergency response partnerships with local hospitals, established scholarships for students entering engineering and logistics. When reporters criticized the company, she invited them inside instead of threatening legal action. Many advisors considered the approach reckless. Victor did not interfere. He simply watched. Every prediction Nora made began proving correct. Public opinion slowly shifted. Editorials that once described the Moretti Group as a mysterious empire began referring to it as one of the city's fastest modernizing corporations. Investors who had postponed meetings requested new negotiations. Government officials who had avoided photographs with Moretti executives now attended ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Quarterly profits exceeded forecasts. Not because the businesses had changed overnight, because people finally believed in them. One afternoon, Victor found Nora alone in the communications department, reviewing campaign reports. She hadn't noticed him standing in the doorway. You missed dinner. She looked up, surprised. I lost track of time. He glanced toward the dozens of handwritten notes covering the conference wall. You've been here since 7. I know. You don't have to prove yourself. Nora smiled faintly. I know. Then why are you still here? For a long moment, she didn't answer. Finally, she closed her notebook. My whole life, people appreciated what I sacrificed, not what I accomplished. They thanked me for being patient, for being understanding, for making other people successful. She met his eyes. No one ever asked what I could build myself. Victor looked around the room. The redesigned branding, the strategic plans, the measurable results. I think they will now. It wasn't intended as comfort. It was simply the truth. Strangely, that meant more. Not everyone welcomed Nora's growing influence. Charles Bennett watched another board meeting end with executives requesting her opinion before his own. His irritation became impossible to hide. As everyone filed out, he approached Victor privately. With respect, boss. Victor looked up. She's becoming very involved. Yes. People are starting to listen to her. They are. Charles hesitated. Is that wise? Victor set down the report he had been reading. When she arrived, he said quietly, our reputation was declining. Our investors were leaving. Our approval ratings were collapsing. He looked directly at Charles. What has happened since? Charles remained silent. Victor answered for him. Revenue increased. Contracts expanded. Public confidence returned. So let me ask you a question. He leaned slightly forward. Are you worried about the company? Or are you worried no one needs your answers anymore? Charles lowered his eyes. I understand. I don't think you do. Victor's voice never rose. But you will. Charles left, without another word. For the first time in decades, the old guard realized Nora Moretti was not merely the boss's wife. She was becoming indispensable. Late one evening, as Victor prepared to leave headquarters, he noticed lights still glowing inside Nora's office. She had fallen asleep over several market reports. A pen remained loosely between her fingers. Without waking her, Victor removed his suit jacket and gently placed it across her shoulders. One of his security officers witnessed the gesture and quietly looked away. Everyone in the organization knew Victor Moretti rarely displayed affection. The next morning, the story had spread through headquarters anyway. Not because anyone dared gossip, because respect often traveled faster than orders. Employees no longer whispered that Nora was only a temporary wife. They began referring to her as part of the future. Neither Victor nor Nora realized they were slowly becoming exactly what the marriage contract had never intended. Partners. Not by law, by choice. Far across the city, Salvatore Greco reviewed a detailed intelligence report describing Nora's growing influence inside the Moretti organization. He closed the folder with a slow smile. "So," he murmured, "she isn't his weakness after all." He looked toward one of his advisors. "That means we'll have to turn her into one." Success never goes unnoticed, especially in Victor Moretti's world. 3 months after Nora's communication strategy transformed the public image of the Moretti Group, another organization quietly began losing influence. The Greco family. For years, Salvatore Greco had controlled politicians through carefully disguised donations, manipulated shipping contracts through shell corporations, and cultivated the image of a respectable businessman, while Victor carried the reputation of being the city's most dangerous man. Now the balance was changing. Every favorable headline about the Moretti Group became another defeat for Greco. He had no intention of allowing that trend to continue. Inside his private office, Salvatore calmly reviewed a stack of intelligence reports. Photographs of Nora attending charity events, newspaper interviews, investor meetings, community redevelopment projects. He tapped one picture with a single finger. This woman changed the battlefield. One of his advisors nodded. "Our analysts believe she's responsible for the increase in investor confidence." Salvatore smiled faintly. "Then we don't attack Victor. We attack belief." Within a week, anonymous stories began appearing across financial blogs and entertainment media. Mafia boss buys himself a wife. Marketing director marries billionaire for fortune. Inside, the contract marriage worth millions. The articles spread with remarkable speed. None of them contained outright lies. Instead, they relied on selective truths. Yes, the marriage had begun as a contract. Yes, Nora would receive financial protection. Yes, Victor possessed unimaginable wealth. The missing piece was simple. None of it explained who Nora truly was. Public opinion began shifting again. Reporters camped outside company offices. Television commentators questioned whether the Moretti Group's charitable expansion had simply become an expensive public relations performance. Several investors delayed negotiations. The board grew nervous. Charles Bennett spoke first during the emergency meeting. "We should deny everything." Another executive disagreed. "We threaten legal action." A third proposed canceling every public appearance until the attention disappeared. Victor listened. Then he turned toward Nora. "What do you think?" Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Months earlier, they would never have asked. Now they waited. Nora remained thoughtful for several moments. "If we respond emotionally," she said, "we lose." She stood and walked toward the display screen. "They're trying to make the conversation about my marriage. We're going to make it about evidence." Her strategy surprised everyone. She instructed the communications team not to deny the existence of the marriage contract. Instead, she ordered its release, redacted only where legally necessary. People fear secrets more than facts. She then assembled forensic accountants, compliance attorneys, and cybersecurity specialists. For 72 consecutive hours, they reviewed thousands of financial records connected to companies repeatedly attacking the Moretti Group online. Patterns emerged. Money transferred between shell corporations, false consulting invoices, fake charitable foundations. One corporate structure appeared again and again. Every trail ultimately pointed toward organizations quietly controlled by Salvatore Greco. Nora looked at the evidence spread across the conference table. He accused us of hiding the truth. A small smile crossed her face. He accidentally showed us where to look. Before the investigation could be completed, another familiar face appeared on national television. Arthur Collins, perfectly dressed, confident as ever. He spoke as though he were a concerned former fiancé. I always believed Nora deserved happiness. He paused dramatically. But I never imagined she'd sacrifice her principles for power. The interviewer leaned forward. So you believe the marriage is financial? Arthur sighed. I think money changes people. Millions watched the interview. Lydia watched it too. From Arthur's luxury apartment. Even she noticed something had changed. Arthur no longer sounded heartbroken. He sounded desperate. Desperate people often made mistakes. Nora never responded publicly. Instead, she requested one document from an old colleague inside Arthur's former corporation. She remembered strange accounting decisions Arthur had once asked her to ignore. At the time, she trusted him completely. Now she reviewed those transactions with fresh eyes. Numbers rarely lied. People did. Within 48 hours, irregular executive reimbursements became impossible to overlook. Offshore transfers, inflated consulting contracts, false performance bonuses. Every signature belonged to Arthur. Every approval carried his authorization. When independent auditors completed their review, the evidence became overwhelming. Arthur had spent years manipulating internal accounts to inflate quarterly earnings and secure larger executive bonuses. The fraud investigation began immediately. His company suspended him before sunset. By morning, federal investigators had seized his office computers. The same media outlets that had questioned Nora's integrity now broadcast Arthur's photograph beneath a different headline. Corporate Executive Under Fraud Investigation. Victor quietly watched the coverage from his office. He looked toward Nora. You planned this. She shook her head. No, I planned to find the truth. The truth planned the rest. For the first time in many years. Victor laughed. Not loudly, not for long, but genuinely. The sound surprised everyone nearby. 1 week later, Nora addressed reporters outside Moretti Group headquarters. Dozens of cameras followed every movement. She stepped to the podium alone. No lawyers, no bodyguards standing behind her, no prepared emotional speech. She simply placed 2 folders on the podium. The first contained the marriage agreement. The second contained verified financial evidence exposing Greco's network and Arthur's fraudulent transactions. I've been accused of marrying for money. Her voice remained calm. I won't ask you to believe me. She gently rested one hand on the documents. I'll ask you to examine facts. Questions erupted immediately. She answered every one, patiently, clearly, without attacking anyone personally. By the end of the press conference, public opinion had shifted once again. Not because Nora had won an argument, because she had earned credibility. Victor watched the broadcast from headquarters. For years, he had believed loyalty was the rarest quality in the world. Now he realized something else was even rarer. Someone willing to stand beside him, not because they feared his power, not because they wanted his wealth, but because they believed he deserved the truth. Across the city, Salvatore Greco switched off the television before the broadcast ended. For the first time since becoming head of his family, he understood something deeply unsettling. He had underestimated Nora Whitaker. And that mistake was about to cost him everything. The annual gathering of mafia leaders, bankers, attorneys, judges, and business families was only days away. Salvatore intended to end Victor's marriage there, publicly, permanently. He was certain Nora would choose freedom over loyalty. He had already prepared the divorce papers. He had no idea that the woman he planned to humiliate would instead change the future of the Moretti Empire forever. The annual council gathering had always been less about celebration than power. Every influential mafia family on the East Coast was represented. Capos, attorneys, bankers, judges who preferred unofficial conversations over public records, executives whose companies appeared perfectly legitimate while quietly depending on syndicate protection. Tonight, every seat in the grand ballroom was occupied. Everyone expected conflict. No one expected history. Victor Moretti entered without ceremony. His reputation had never required an announcement. The room instinctively fell quiet. Nora walked beside him, not behind him. The subtle difference did not escape the experienced men seated around the room. Some exchanged curious glances. Others frowned. Salvatore Greco noticed all of it, exactly as planned. He smiled to himself. Everything was unfolding according to his design, or so he believed. Formal business concluded quickly. Shipping routes, territorial agreements, construction partnerships, investment disputes. Then Salvatore slowly rose from his chair. If I may, every conversation stopped. He walked toward the center table, carrying a slim leather folder. I've spent many years respecting Victor Moretti. He paused, which is precisely why I find recent events unfortunate. Several family leaders exchanged knowing looks. Everyone understood what was coming. Salvatore placed the folder directly before Nora. I believe temporary arrangements eventually become expensive mistakes. He opened the folder. Inside rested professionally prepared divorce papers. Alongside them lay a certified bank draft. $5 million. Exactly matching the settlement clause written into Nora's marriage contract. I imagine this amount should compensate you generously. His smile never reached his eyes. No woman deserves to remain trapped in a marriage built on necessity. The room became perfectly silent. Every gaze settled upon Nora. Some expected relief. Others expected hesitation. A few expected greed. Victor remained motionless. He neither interrupted nor reached for the documents. If Nora wished to leave, he would not stop her. Not because he wanted to lose her, because real loyalty could never be demanded, only chosen. Nora slowly picked up the divorce papers. She carefully turned each page. Her expression revealed nothing. The silence stretched long enough for uncertainty to spread throughout the room. Even Salvatore began believing he had already won. Then, without warning, Nora tore the first page directly down the middle. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Rip. Another page. Rip. Another. And another. Within seconds, the carefully prepared legal documents lay scattered across the polished conference table in dozens of worthless pieces. No one moved. No one breathed. Nora placed the final torn fragment onto the pile before calmly looking around the room. Her voice remained steady. I agreed to this marriage because I had nowhere else to stand. No dramatic music. No raised voice. Only absolute certainty. She turned toward Victor, the man who had never once asked her to become someone she wasn't. The man who had respected her decisions before loving her. The man who had trusted her mind before admiring her heart. A gentle smile appeared. I'm staying, she said softly, because this is the first place I've ever been respected. Silence. Complete silence. Even Salvatore could not speak. For the first time since entering the room, Victor's composure almost faltered. Not because of the declaration, because he understood exactly what it had cost her to say those words. Victor stood, slowly, deliberately. He reached for Nora's hand. She accepted without hesitation. Looking directly at every leader gathered before him, Victor spoke with the quiet authority that had built one of the most powerful organizations in the country. This marriage is no longer temporary. He paused. Effective immediately. Nora Moretti becomes my permanent partner, not only in this family, but in every legitimate enterprise operating under the Moretti Group. A murmur spread through the hall. The announcement meant far more than marriage. It meant succession, authority, trust, responsibility, equal standing. One elderly capo rose from his chair, then another, then another. Within moments, veteran leaders throughout the ballroom stood in silent acknowledgement. None of them stood because Victor ordered it. They stood because Nora had earned it. Months earlier, she had arrived with nothing except heartbreak. Now the most powerful men on the East Coast welcomed her as an equal. Across the room, Salvatore slowly lowered his eyes. His plan had not merely failed. It had strengthened the very people he hoped to divide. Several months later, the transformation of the Moretti Group became impossible to ignore. Under Nora's strategic leadership, legitimate operations expanded into new markets. Community investment programs doubled. International investors returned. Universities requested partnerships. Business journals featured her innovation strategies on their front pages. New employees quickly learned something interesting. Nobody introduced Nora as simply the boss's wife. Instead, they said, "She's the executive who changed this company." The title meant infinitely more. Arthur Collins received his sentence after pleading guilty to multiple counts of corporate fraud. His executive career ended permanently. The friends who once admired his ambition quietly disappeared. No prestigious company would hire him again. The future he had sacrificed Nora to obtain vanished piece by piece. Lydia remained beside him for only a short time. Without luxury, without influence, without admiration, their relationship collapsed beneath the weight of the selfishness that had created it. For the first time in her life, Lydia discovered that taking someone else's happiness never guaranteed her own. One quiet afternoon, Alessandro Ricci entered Nora's office, carrying a familiar envelope. The contract required me to ask. He placed the untouched bank draft before her. The $5 million settlement remains available. Nora looked at the check for several thoughtful seconds. Months earlier, she would have considered it life-changing. Now, it represented a version of herself that no longer existed. She gently pushed it back across the desk. "I came here looking for protection." She glanced through the office window. Outside, Victor waited beside the car after finishing another board meeting. He wasn't checking his watch. He wasn't rushing her. He simply waited, exactly as he always had. A warm smile crossed her face. "I found a future instead." She left the check behind, without regret, without hesitation, without looking back. Together, Nora and Victor entered Moretti headquarters through the front doors. Employees greeted them not with fear, but with respect. The woman whose own family had always asked her to sacrifice everything had finally found a place where her intelligence mattered more than her obedience. The man who had spent his life believing loyalty could only be purchased had discovered that genuine partnership had to be earned. Neither of them had been searching for love. They had been searching for someone they could trust. In the end, that proved to be far more powerful. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making the people who betrayed you suffer. It's building a life so full of purpose, respect, and genuine happiness that their betrayal no longer defines your story. And for Nora Moretti, that victory belonged to her alone.